We are throwing literally billions of dollars at a problem that a rodent already figured out how to solve. I know that sounds crazy, but stick with me here. Let's talk about the summer in the American West. It's basically just smoke season now. Every year, we watch massive walls of flame eat through the forests, and every year, the government writes a bigger check to stop it. The National Interagency Fire Center keeps official records on this stuff, and their suppression table is honestly hard to even comprehend. $3,745 billion. That felt like a huge number at the time. $389 billion. In a single year. And the table shows this isn't just a bad season here or there. Suppression costs have topped $1 billion every single year since 2011. We throw planes, helicopters, bulldozers, and thousands of tired people at these burn zones. We carve massive dirt roads through the woods hoping the fire will stop when it runs out of trees. But what if the ultimate firebreak doesn't look like a dirt road at all? If you caught our previous video on the beavers up in Washington state, you might remember we briefly touched on this weird idea of fireproof refugia. Well, today we are going all the way down the rabbit hole. Because there is a growing realization that our modern, heavy machinery approach might be completely backward. Brock Dolman, who works at the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center, spelled this out in an interview with ABC 10 back in August of 2022. He argued that beavers provide benefits that humans are currently spending hundreds of millions of dollars trying to buy. And his bottom line was simple. The beavers just do it better and cheaper. So hey race, what happened? A researcher named Dr. Emily Fairfax decided to actually test this. She published a major paper in the journal Ecological Applications in 2020, and it has the greatest title ever, Smokey the Beaver. But her obsession with this didn't start with an abstract theory in a lab. It started by staring at the aftermath of a disaster from the year 2000. The Manter Fire had ripped through California's southern Sierra region, and Fairfax later said that specific year, 2000 fire is what inspired the entire project. When you look at a forest after a massive blaze like the Manter Fire, it usually looks like a moonscape. Black dirt, gray ash, nothing left alive. But there was a 2019 article from NASA Science discussing the Landsat program's satellite imagery of the area, and it showed something practically impossible. Meanwhile, similar areas right nearby that didn't have beavers lost 51% of their greenness. They got absolutely baked. Which brings up the obvious question. How does a buck-toothed animal that weighs 40 pounds stop a literal wall of fire? Well, here's how it works. It all comes down to plumbing. The main mechanism is water redistribution. Beavers don't just stack some sticks in the main river and take a nap. They are obsessive builders. They dig out these intricate little canals that branch off from the main pond. They use these canals to float logs safely, but an amazing side effect is that those canals spread the pond water far out through the entire riparian zone. It essentially acts like a massive drip irrigation system for the valley. This keeps all the surrounding vegetation deeply green, and it makes the entire landscape just fundamentally too wet to burn. The fire hits this soggy, lush wall of water and plants, and it just stops. Fairfax and her co-author, Andrew Whittle, wanted to know if this was a fluke. So, for that 2020 Ecological Applications paper, which became their central study, they looked much bigger. They compared riparian corridors that had beaver dams against corridors without them, and they did this across 5 different large western U.S. wildfires. And they found the exact same pattern. Across the board, the beaver corridors were less affected by the fire. Now, think about what it's like to be an animal trapped in a forest fire. The smoke rolls in, the heat spikes, and you have nowhere to go. These beaver zones become something ecologists call fire refugia. It's an oasis. The importance of these scattered safe zones is actually huge for the whole ecosystem, and the broader literature on fire refugia predates Fairfax's specific beaver work. For instance, there was a major study published in the journal Ecosphere back in 2019. The researchers went out and sampled 686 different sites located inside 12 large western U.S. wildfires. What they found was fascinating. The way the forest managed to recover and regenerate closely tracked how close they were to these refugia, and how dense those safe zones were. And surprisingly, having a lot of small, scattered patches actually improved the whole landscape's recovery more than having a few giant ones. That describes a beaver-dammed river perfectly. A long chain of small, incredibly tough safe patches. It's not just the big animals hiding out, either. It's the microscopic foundation of the food chain. A Washington study published in 2020 titled Beavers Buffering Blazes looked at the water itself. The researcher found that macroinvertebrate communities, basically the tiny water bugs that fish eat, differed significantly below beaver dams in burned areas. He found that the more sensitive taxa of bugs were often surviving just fine below the dams and in unburned sites. The author did call this result preliminary, but it's an incredible snapshot of how a beaver dam protects life at every single level. And that protection lasts long after the smoke clears. One of the worst parts of a wildfire happens during the first big rainstorm. With no plant roots left to hold the soil, the rain washes a toxic sludge of ash and burned dirt straight into the rivers. It literally suffocates the streams. But a 2024 sediment study published in Earth Surface Processes and Landforms revealed another beaver superpower. The researchers looked at 40 different ponds. 4 centimeters per year after. That's an avalanche of mud. But the burned ponds acted like giant catch basins. The study found these burned ponds ended up with a median relative volume of 85% mud and sediment, versus just 58% in the unburned ponds. The beavers had built a filtration system that caught the destruction before it could ruin the water downstream. By the time 2024 and 2025 rolled around, this whole concept had moved way past just a single academic paper. We started seeing active field reporting, new modeling, and researchers physically working inside live burn scars. Take the Manter Fire, which burned across Wyoming and Colorado. Emily Fairfax spoke to KUNC Radio on October 1, 2024, and she dropped a crazy statistic. She said that inside the Manter Fire scar alone, there were about 1,000 satellite-visible beaver ponds that had provided fire refugia during the blaze. 1,000. Just sitting out there, fighting back the flames entirely on their own. It's frustrating to think about, but this isn't even a brand new conservation idea. Some people have been shouting about this for decades. A Journal of Soil and Water Conservation article published all the way back in 1984 talked about how more than 80% of the riparian habitat in southwestern Wyoming had already been lost. Even back then, 40 years ago, they were describing how land managers were working with eager beavers as a low-cost restoration tool. We knew they were cheap, effective engineers back when my parents were in high school. We just forgot how many of them there used to be. Ashley Hom, who is a U.S. Forest Service hydrologist now working at the Tahoe National Forest, gave an interview to KUNC in 2024. She said she thinks every perennial stream out there used to be just wall-to-wall beaver dams. Can you imagine what that landscape looked like? It would be a continent-sized sponge. This might work for you if you're looking for some actual good news, because we can still get a lot of that back. A brand new 2025 model published in Ecological Applications looked specifically at California's Sierra Nevada region. The researchers estimated that 51% of the historical beaver dam building capacity is still remaining right there in that region. If we just stepped back and let them repopulate those exact spots, the model estimates that the region could store an additional 120 million cubic meters of water. And more importantly, it could create 2,200 square kilometers of fire resilience. But here's the problem. I want to be totally honest with you, because science is rarely a perfect silver bullet. The evidence base for all of this is actually still pretty narrow. That 2020 paper by Stewart literally points out that studies specifically on beaver and wildfire interactions are lacking. The absolute strongest findings I've dug up are mostly limited to riparian zones, they rely heavily on looking at things from space using remote sensing, and they are limited to just a handful of fires in the western U.S. And Fairfax's own 2020 paper is very careful not to overstate things. They noted that the plant greenness actually rebounded the year after the fire regardless of whether there was beaver activity. So the clearest, most undeniable claim here is about fire resistance, the creation of those life-saving refugia during the fire itself, rather than some guaranteed magic trick for post-fire recovery speed. So race what it all comes down to. We've spent decades trying to fight nature using money and machinery. We throw billions of dollars at fires every single year. We dig trenches, we drop fire retardant from the sky, and we constantly build human-made firebreaks that often just get jumped by the flames anyway. Meanwhile, the original engineers of the forest are just sitting there, working the night shift for free. They build a better firebreak. They do it cheaper. They've been doing it for millions of years. And all we really have to do is let them. If you want to see exactly how these animals completely flip ecosystems on their head and rebuild rivers from scratch, click the video on screen to watch our deep dive on the beavers of Washington State.